All right.
All right, cool, everybody.
Cool.
I'd like to introduce you to the brilliant Dr. Rogelio Realzola. He is currently the Major League Performance Analyst for the Baltimore Orioles, and he definitely has a very well experienced and accomplished background leading up to his experiences, which I'll let him get into that soon. Me and him, we became familiar with one another during my time working in Major League Baseball. And of course, he's currently still working in Major League Baseball. We actually connected at the MLB Draft Combine and was able to keep the connection going from there. So, without further ado, I will turn it over to him and allow him to talk more about his experiences, and we'll listen to him. The floor is yours, sir.
Cool. Awesome. Thank you for the introduction. Well, first off, Cordero was smart enough to get out of sport. Unfortunately, I am not smart enough, so I'm still here. Um, but yeah, what I wanted to do today was kind of give a brief introduction to, myself, my background, how I got to this point, and then kind of talk about sports science a little more. So, what it is that I do within my job. And what I think sports scientists do as professionals. Um, and then we're going to end with like a super succinct version of what I did with an athlete that I worked with when I was working with a UFC athlete. So, yeah, trying to hit like a bunch of points so that you get a better idea. You can come to me with any questions you might have, and just hopefully have a talk here that you can walk away with something useful. So, sports science in professional sports, as Cordero said, my name's Rogelio. What I did is I started in undergrad. Every time I do these talks, I'm like, man, I was you all, 20 years ago. It seems like, well, so I turned 33 2 days ago, so like 10, maybe 15 years ago. But I went to Loyola University Chicago, and I started there as a double major in biology and music. Spent a lot of time in the gym and somehow just like fell in love with being a gym rat. Had some experiences that led me down the road of getting to understand what exercise science is. And I was like, this is cool. I want to be a gym rat. I want to be a bro professor. Like, let's do that. And so I ended up graduating with my bachelor's in exercise science. And what that did is it led me to Mississippi State, where I was a graduate assistant. So as a graduate assistant, I worked as the personal trainer's graduate assistant. So I was developing them, which is what I did in undergrad. So it was a nice little segue. But I was also the head strength coach for the cheer and pom teams at Mississippi State, competitive and game day. So I got to be a coach again some more. So I was a personal trainer for 4 years in undergrad, got to be a head strength coach for 2 years. Great experience I was the only one there. So I got to mess up a lot, got to fail forward, taught me a lot about working with elite level athletes. And I originally went there to kind of get my grades up, to go back to being a physical therapy student. At some point that was just kind of like my dream, right? And I remember taking a metabolism class with my mentor, Dr. John Eric Smith. And I was like, this is so cool. I love metabolism. I love physiology. Like, this is what I want to do. And he's like, go get your PhD, man. Like, go do some research, see if that's your thing. And I said, YOLO, let's do it. And that led me to the University of New Mexico in 2018. And while I was there, I mean, I feel like I took all I could from Albuquerque. You'll see here that I was getting my PhD at the time. That is also when I worked at the Performance Trench, which I'll talk about in a bit. I had an internship, and then I also during that time got an internship with the Arizona Cardinals. So it's a very full and packed 4 years, 4.5, that taught me a lot about sports science, academia, and really helped lead me to the point that I'm in today. Outside of my academic route, I have, like my business life, my professional life. I've had an online training business, ROI Health, Nutrition, and Performance, since I think 2016, 2017. And if you're ever blessed enough to be a graduate assistant, you learn really quickly that they don't pay you enough to survive. So what I needed was I needed to make some money. And I was like, well, I've been training, I train people. How can I make some money? And that's where my training business started. But I was able to take those experiences and meet up with and talk to the owner of this place called the Performance Ranch. Um, and he was like, we need like a sports scientist. We work with a lot of high-level athletes. Is there anything you can do? And I was like, buddy, if you are asking if I want to work for you, I will take that. And so for 2 years, I was in charge of the sports science there, and I was also part of helping develop our staff. So my job, what I wanted to do, and I actually found the email like 2 days ago that I sent back in 2019. So I didn't want to just be another trainer. I wanted to make sure we were using things like metabolic carts, jump mats, like all this information that we had to make an athlete be the best that they could be, and also to develop the staff. And that was a really great learning opportunity that like really catapulted me into being a sports scientist. When I graduated in 2022, I was applying for jobs. The Orioles called at the right time. They had a position. I said, let's do this. I didn't really think I'd be in baseball, but that's where I'm at now. So I'm in Baltimore as the Major League Performance Analyst, which is just the Major League Sports Scientist. So during my PhD and during my master's program, what I did was I taught classes, right? That's how we were able to make money and get our tuition reimbursed. So I taught intro to weightlifting, advanced weightlifting, test and measurements, and then motor learning. My research focus was really it started in ergogenic aids. So I did the use of carbohydrates for performance on cheerleaders because they were my athletes. So I was like, what can I do that automatically can help the people that I'm working with? And that started my love for research. And when I went to UNM, it really turned into cardiometabolic resistance training. And that's just a fancy way of saying, can I get cardio benefits while lifting weights? Short answer, yes. Long answer, up to a point. But I was so much of a gym rat. I hated cardio. I was like, well, if I can just like live faster, right? I can get these benefits. And it's true up to a point when you're as deconditioned as I am. But it was like really great information, really cool experience to like get that research done, get a better understanding of muscle physiology. And ultimately that led me to heat and recovery. So my dissertation was on using hot water immersion after a absolutely grueling training session to see if you recovered faster. Um, Still haven't published it. Once I got this job, Cordero can speak to it. Baseball is baseball. You just hit the ground running. But I hope to soon. Sorry to my professors if anyone's watching this. But yeah, it was a really great experience and led me to being like, how can we optimize an athlete to the highest degree, not only from training as hard, but also recovering hard. And I think about like how I got there, how I got to a PhD, how I've gotten to this point, and it all started with an exercise science degree, right? Some of you are kines, exercise science, like whatever it's called, and there's so much that you can do with this undergrad degree, right? You can become a physical therapist. That's what I wanted to do originally. I know a lot of people that go on to become athletic trainers, PE teachers. When I went to University of New Mexico or Mississippi State University, I actually thought for a second I was going to be like a recreation and sport director. So your university recreation building, like I wanted to run that. Um, People go on to be doctors. My wife was a nurse, is now a nurse practitioner. I'm a strength coach, lots of strength coaches. And like you can do all these things with this degree, which I think is really awesome because it speaks to health, it speaks to being a scientist. And ultimately, like in some way, shape, or form, if you have this degree, you're learning not only about the human body, but how to apply it to perform, to be healthier. And that's what really drew me to it instead of just like biology, because biology and physiology are great, but if I can know what it's doing and how I can change it through exercise, that's what really got me. And now we have this kind of new emerging field called sports science, which is what I'm going to talk about today, which is kind of what I do. But before we get to that, right, like I've kind of very quickly talked about how I wanted to do this, I wanted to do this, I wanted to do this. And if you're a normal person, right, you're sitting in that chair right now going, well, I want to do this, but I think I kind of want to do this. I'm not sure if I want to do this. And that's good. That's an okay thing, right? I switched my degree from biology to exercise science my spring semester of my senior year, which meant I was 3 or 4 months away from graduating. And I said, no, I want to do this. I want to chase this passion. I want to learn more about it. My mom, amazing. Yes, follow your passions, blah, 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 blah. My dad, what are we doing? I need you to graduate. I need you to get out of school. I need you to work. And it's funny now, right? 10 years removed, like we laugh about it. But in that moment, you're like, well, these are the decisions I want to make as a person, as my own person, and I want to roll with it. But these are the questions that I was always asking myself, like, how does what I want to do or how does what I do fit into the lifestyle that I want? Sports is very fun. Everyone thinks it's very, um, very cool, but it is very grueling. You do have no freedom. You are there to wait hand and foot on the players, as well as anything that the front office or the stakeholders like ask of you. So, like, if you want to do that, awesome, but I'll also understand that certain things come with it. You can choose happiness and freedom over money. Generally, in sports, you get neither, right? But there's a lot more that comes with being part of a system, part of an org that develops players. And ultimately, you're in this because you want to compete and you want to win and you want to push yourselves and the people you're around. But those things only happen if you run with any chance that comes your way, right? I didn't think I always thought I would do something cool, whatever that meant, but I never thought that I would be like a sports scientist for a sports team, right? I thought maybe I'd be a personal trainer, thought maybe I would just be like a strength coach, but this life has been so awesome, and it's because I was like, you want to do this? Yes. You want to do this? Yes. And I did burn the candle on both ends for a long time. And that's probably why I look like I'm 40 when I'm only 33. But like these are all things that I did to get me to this point, and I don't really regret them. And I only did those things because I found people that also did the same thing. So my mentors are very important to me. People that like you click with. Maybe it is Cordero, maybe it's another teacher, maybe it's someone you just find on LinkedIn or something and you grab a coffee with. These are people that you can talk to. Success leaves clues, and you can just kind of figure out whether you really want to do something or not. And most importantly, like you have your entire life to figure out what you want to do. Like I said, I'm 33. I've been in sports and a sports scientist for 10 years now. Um, and I like it. I don't know if I'll do this forever, but I'm not like scared about what comes next. I think that I have accumulated a decent amount of skills over the years that allow me to kind of do whatever. But if you have, you know, the education, the desire, and like the curiosity, you can go and do whatever you want to do, and continue to switch out. Like nobody says that what you're doing this year has to be what you're doing next year. And so that leads me to a sports scientist, sports science. And we can talk very briefly about like what it is, right? So if you've been taking these classes, maybe you're not exactly sure what a sports scientist is, or you are like understanding of what peak power is, but how does that actually like get used within the context of competitive sport? So this is one of my golfers, Sam Saunders. But the question always like, what is sports science? What are we doing this for? It's like, well, it's more than data and technology. I think that we are getting bombarded with way more information than we ever have. And I think that that's great, right? We need information, we need technology, but it does involve a lot of noise. So we have to figure out what's important. More importantly, what we do as a sports scientist is we're connecting training day in and day out on the field, off the field, in the weight room, on the field, to the game. So what's actually happening during the game. And now this huge push of connecting it to lifestyle data. So if you are crushing it in the gym, crushing it um, in every aspect of your life, but on the field, like it's just not showing up and the talent is there. But you're consistently sleeping terribly, or you just had a kid and all that stress is there, or you're like someone who's always fighting with your significant other. Those are things that are going to affect you on a physiological level. That's going to affect your ability to practice, to perform, to win, and then ultimately your sport. So it's also trying to connect all those other things, not just game wise, but life wise. And what we're trying to do as sports scientists is to help identify what truly drives performance. So if you are a long distance runner, is it really important that you have super strong legs? No, it would probably be important, but not as important as a VO2 max or a ventilatory threshold that's high. Um, me working in baseball, very different set of demands compared to my golfers, my fighters, and then my NFL players, right? So it's all trying to figure out what is going to give us the biggest bang for our buck, as we do things. And then you may be sitting there like, well, yeah, but like if I'm a strength coach, I can figure this stuff out. Or like, is it really that important? Because like it's just information. And you should care, right? Because if you're not tracking things, then you're just guessing. And I do this with myself too, right? I have training logs for the past 10 years. I track my blood. My birthday was 2 days ago. First thing I did, 8 o'clock in the morning, went to get a performance blood panel done just to see, like how am I going into this year compared to other years? Where do I want to be? We do the same thing with our athletes because everything matters. And these are multi-million, potentially billion-dollar decisions that we're making. So we have to track these things. We should also care because data is continuously growing. From what I can see there, does anyone have like a Whoop, Aura, Garmin? Like raise your hands if you do. One, one person, two people, which is kind of crazy, right? If I could, I would have technology all over myself because I love seeing these things. But that speaks to data continuously growing and us being like, okay, that's a data point. Your resiliency is down. What does that mean? Your energy is up. What does that mean? And then in a blood level, right? Like this specific marker is not as optimal. How can we change that? But these are all things that are going to drive decisions, that are going to drive wins, that are going to drive championships, and that is what we want. It's also important that, like, if you are someone who's like, maybe that's not as important, I'm not bought in on that, good for you, right? But the demands of sport are higher than they've ever been. They're only going to increase as more money comes into it. The time to execution is lower. If it's you and me against one another, even as sports scientists, if I can identify what's going on with my athlete before you can yours, I can tell him, we can plan, we're going to win, right? So if I can do this a lot quicker with the use of data, instead of just kind of waiting it out and seeing how things are going to go, it's going to make me a better practitioner, but it's going to make the athlete a much better athlete. And we're only getting better. You all are coming out of school with more information than I had when I came out of school, right? So you're kind of starting at a higher level. Now, my job is to make sure you don't catch up, right? So I'm doing all these things to make sure that I stay better. But everyone coming into S&C, everyone coming into sports science, they're only getting better. And if we can do these things better, then you're going to win more often than not. So as just a kind of little idea of what it is that I do, right? We have all this information. We're trying to get down to a KPI. It's a key performance indicator. And very briefly, right? Because I really want to leave time at the end for you to ask any questions you might have. So I feel like I want to understand this a little more, ask it at the end, but I'm about to blitz you all with some information, some examples. So we always start with raw data, right? And I just want to focus and capture everything accurately, but I know that not everything is valuable. And my goal is just that we're ensuring quality and consistency. Once I've gotten that, we can then organize the information. All right, so like all this information, is it clean? Is it labeled correctly? And then does it matter? And how does it matter? So this person ran the fastest they've ever run. Oh, but it was in the off season and they didn't do anything for 2 weeks. Does that matter to me compared to when it's the middle of the season? Probably not, right? But it's using this information, contextualizing it, and organizing it. And our goal here is to turn data, right, this raw data, into information that is then interpretable. And that leads us to our KPI. So I have this data, I've interpreted it, and you know what? This isn't useful. Send it. This is good. I want it here. So now I want to identify what truly matters for the context of the sport, the context of when it's happening in the sport, the context of, maybe it's not the greatest information, but you're the only person doing it. That's good. You have a front office that has given you a blank check that says, go find everything. Totally different context. And it's important to remember that because that's going to help drive the KPIs as well. The goal here is now we have information that is useful. And how we can do that is we have this kind of flow chart, data capture, interpretation, decision making. And none of this is like, it shouldn't be surprising, right? You all do this with everyday work, whether it's work you're doing, training on yourself, how you study, it's kind of within the same thing. So data capture, right? Within sports, we have things like high velocity distance. We talked about an aura ring, right? These are things you have heart rate variability. You have all this information, right, that I talked about. We capture it. Awesome. What does it mean? Absolutely nothing until you interpret it in the grand scheme of things, right? Now we can look at how this is changing based on you as an individual. So Tom is always between 5 and 10, and now he's at 15. Was that a good thing? Is a bad thing? Because it's clearly out of range. Let's just say it's a good thing, we keep riding. Let's say it's a bad thing, pull it back. But what we're trying to do is look at all this information so that it's usable and then ultimately leads us to decision making. So if someone comes in, they've run a lot, so high velocity distance. Okay, I say a lot. Let's just say it's 500 feet. That's a lot. Okay, this person normally runs only 300 feet. Is that higher or lower than before? Well, it's clearly higher. It's almost 50% higher, or it's almost 100% higher. What's the decision we're going to make there? Well, the decision now is we're going to adjust our training and recovery. We may have to construct the roster a little differently if they need an off day. And then we have to make sure that these people are eating and sleeping correctly. So it's all this information that leads to the ultimate decision that's going on. And so when I did work for the UFC or with UFC athletes, this is kind of a very small snapshot of how we did things. I was very honored and blessed to work with John Jones. And if there's one thing that you can take a picture of, this is a very easy slide of like how we tested him and other athletes, why we chose the tests that we chose. All right, the physical attribute is the counter movement jump. What is this assessing? Elastic strength. What does that mean? It's the ability to generate peak power. How does this transfer to the sport? And like that's how we did everything. If it did not fit within certain boxes, we gutted it because there's so much practice that needs to be done, so much information that needs to be handled, and we're trying to make sure that we maximize everything. And so we did these tests, and it ultimately led us to a couple things. But here's an example of how we use that information. So we did a VO2 max test. At that time, his VO2 max was 51.1 milliliters per kilogram per liter. And that put him at the good range compared to other UFC athletes. And so in our mind, it was like, okay, heart rate or max heart rate, good. VO2 max, good on a bike. He normally didn't bike. So now we know it's probably a little higher. And so this guy's got an engine. We don't super have to focus on it. Let's focus on the other things that he is not as good at. And that's what kind of led us to, along with our other battery of tests, this pros and cons list. High VO2 max, good recoverability. He's very strong. He had very good jump height, so he's explosive. And he obviously has high fighting IQ. He's the GOAT. It's very hard to argue that there's any better fighter than John Jones. The cons were that like maybe the peak power output wasn't as good as we want it to be. His reactive strength index within the confines of the test that we did was bad. So maybe he's not as springy, he's not as light on his feet. And the speed strength thing was really because he was probably training too heavily at that time, and we were trying to get him to be more explosive. So it's like all that information that we could get to help drive the decision of what's practice going to look like, what's training going to look like, and how are we going to do that for 8 weeks so that when it comes time, he is peaked. We have left no stone unturned, and he can go in and win his championships. So, uh, that, like I said, right, was a huge, this is how I got to this point. This is how we can use this context or this data within specific context, and an example of how we've done it within a sport, right, at the highest level. So some final takeaways for this before, like I said, I want to have as much time for questions, is like what sports science is, how we can use it. It's a growing field, but it is a results-driven business. If you come in, your team loses consistently, you get fired, right? Whether it's your fault or not, like that's just the way it goes. There's a lot of insecurity that comes with that, right? Like we live in Baltimore, we have a house, we know at any moment, see ya. We'd have to sell the house and move somewhere. That's just what we're okay with right now, me and my wife, but that's part of sports. All data is good data, but better data is better data. If you can pound your fist on the table and say, I want this instead of this because of A, B, C, and D, and nobody can come back with that, then that helps you be a better practitioner. It helps you be a better server to your athletes and your org. And the goal is never to collect everything, it's to collect what matters most consistently. And I love being a scientist. Like, I think people that are sport coaches fall in love with the sport. The athlete falls in love with that specific sport. I have always been in love with knowing more. I have always been in love with being able to take things apart, build them back up. And that's my job as a scientist. And if like that's what you like to do within the context of sport, within the context of competition, then I think being a sports scientist is for you, is going to be a really rewarding field for you. It's just going to kick you in the butt, and you have to be willing to hold on for 10, 15, 20 years before you get any sort of like real payoff. Um, so that being said, here's my contact information that I'm willing to give out publicly, right? Find me on LinkedIn if you ever like, this is going to be question and answer time. If you have a question that didn't get answered or you're too shy to ask, please hit me up on LinkedIn. I will try and answer it there. You can also DM my business page. It's ROI Health. Same thing. You got a question, I'll try and answer it. I am here to serve you guys, your students. I wish I would have had someone come talk to me when I was in your seat, literally and figuratively. And then that's my website in case you want to learn a little bit more about me or whatever. But yeah, I want to open this floor up. I told Cordero it was going to be real quick because I wanted to make sure that I gave enough time to answer questions that you all might have.
Volume.
Oh, sorry.
Can you hear
Okay,
me?
not. Yeah, I can. And if not, Cordero can just talk.
Okay. Um, you touched on wearables a bit. Does wearable data play into how you program for your athletes with the Orioles or any of your previous teams?
Yeah, definitely. So HRV is definitely something that it's an important metric. Um, I think within the context of each piece of technology, you have to look at it and say like, well, if with an Aura you have a 46 and with the Garmin you have a 62 and it was the exact same time, like which one are you going to listen to? You just pick one, be consistent, and just treat it as that one thing. We do it on a case-by-case basis at the Orioles. That is something that I think we are trying to build up. And I think any sports science department that is smart is going to invest a lot of money into wearable technologies because it's easy, right? Like I don't have to poke and prod you. I can just ask you, what's your resiliency score today? And as these companies get bigger, they start to kind of appeal more to sports teams. They can create APIs, they can sell dashboards, and then a team can decide to either buy it or build their own. Yeah, so I think that it's super important. It's easy to access. We're using it, we're trying to use it more. But if an athlete comes to me and says that they have it, I'm all in. There's no way I'm going to be like, I don't need that, you know? Any and all questions, life, sports.
Yeah, good question. Um, you've been with the Orioles for what is this? Are you going into your fourth season?
Yeah, yeah.
Um, what do you notice from your perspective has been the biggest difference in the field of sports science from when you first learned of it at you first learned of it at Mississippi State, correct?
Yeah.
Yeah. Um, what has been the biggest difference that you noticed from when you first learned the sports science from your time at Mississippi State going into Mexico to now with you going into your fourth year with the Warriors?
Yeah. I think sports is inherently competitive, and so is the technology and data side of the vendors of those, right? So, I mean, before a Tendo unit was the only way that you could track velocity-based training. And now you have companies that have their own tethers. And now you have companies like Perch that use cameras. And then you have companies like Output that it's not a tether, but it uses like I forget the technical term, but it uses the actual motion throughout space to tell you how fast things are going. And so I think that innovation is blowing up and it's awesome to see it, right? Because everyone's trying to fight for their part or for their little place within sport, within an org. So you have to be cheaper, you have to be better, you have to be different. And I think it's a good thing, but it's a bad thing because now we have like all this information overload. And so I think that's where the job of sports scientists is going to be even more critical than it is now because a front office is going to say, we have 40 options here. What can we cut back to save money slash what's not important? And then we go in and say, okay, here are 15, just cut the rest of them. Um, and I think companies are also starting to learn that. So they're starting to like meld. So Catapult bought Perch so that they can be one big thing and sell a specific service. Teamworks has started to buy other companies that are like workout companies or tracking companies for workouts. And because now you can just sell a bigger product that's going to encompass a lot of different things. So I think we're at a point now where like everything is being built out like this, and the companies with a ton of money are starting to like slowly buy out what they think is necessary. And then they can say, hey, if you pay me, I got six of these things. You don't have to get any more. Great, I'm going to do that. So it's like half of the innovation is booming, and then it's just the consolidation of that information. That's been the biggest difference in 10 years. Even in the past 3 years, like stuff is just exploding, which is really cool.
Like it's the gift because growing field, we're happy to see that new tech is coming out and everybody loves the new toys, but you know it's a curse because there's information overload, like you said.
Yeah.
Get a lot of this stuff, and of course, you know that's stuff that we look at it too. We're like, okay, how is this useful? Not saying it's
Mhm.
not useful, but for us in our operation. So continue on with that same question. You were at Mississippi State for your master's, so you went from an SEC school to New Mexico, a Mountain West school. Boo, by the way. Uh, so at Mississippi State, SEC, it's no secret they have the money. Mountain West schools, I'm not familiar with New Mexico, but I do feel confident in saying that their pockets are not as deep as an SEC school. So, did you notice any challenges as far as like going from Mississippi State and what they had readily available in their lab compared to going to Mexico State? And if so, how did you combat that? Because I know you mentioned part of it was, yeah, we all get it. Graduate assistants, we're broke, got to find other ways to make money come in. But again, Mississippi State being the SEC school, I'm assuming the time you were there, they had all the cool gadgets. And going to Mexico, again, I'm not familiar there, but I don't know if they did have necessarily the resources there that Mississippi State did. What
Yeah.
were the challenges there that you may have noticed, and how exactly did you overcome them in a sense?
Yeah. Well, first of all, better than UNLV, right? So I'm just gonna throw it out there. And anywhere else that you've gone to school. No, it's interesting you mentioned that because even working in professional sports now, right? Like you look at a team like the Orioles or like any baseball team. Um, oh, they have deep pockets. They should have A, B, and C. Well, they don't, right? Because the owner wants to make money. The owner wants to win with as little money as possible. That's just how capitalism works, right? And there are tiers. You have the Orioles, then you have a team like the Yankees, the Dodgers, the Mets, right? Like totally different pockets. And it's the same way with these schools, right? At Mississippi State, it was a growing field. So when I was at Loyola, I think I was part of like the first graduating class of exercise scientists. So once I moved to Mississippi State, I was like, whoa, there's so much I didn't learn simply because like it was the first one. Like they haven't had years and years of experience. I get to Mississippi State, I'm working under John Eric Smith. That's the guy who's been killing it in the field, who's worked for Gatorade, who's worked for teams. And he taught me, he had a saying that said, he expects perfection, but he begrudgingly accepts excellence. And like that's what we were supposed to do with or without any sort of resources. So we wanted to do research. You had to apply for the grants. It's not like he had all this money. SEC deeper pockets for sports but for facilities and things, not so much. And then I go to UNM where there's no like nobody looks at UNM and it's like, oh yeah, you went there, like awesome. But it was built on like decades of experience. So they had a heat lab. We had an altitude chamber, heat chamber, that's what it was. So like they had been doing it for so much longer that although like the money resources weren't there, the like resources in professors in the decades of research built up to get to that point, it was just a lot different and it was vast there. So I almost feel like I was in a better position at UNM than I was at Mississippi State, but I also was a PhD student there. So like the demands were higher, the expectations were higher. And I don't know if it would have been the same thing if I was a PhD student at Mississippi State. But no place ever has just free money, which is just something that I've learned. And you have to fight for, even if you think it's like the best research or the best idea, like I don't know, man. If someone can do it for half the cost and give me 90% of it, like, what do I care about your extra 10%? Just trying to figure out, not just in life, not just in school, not just in work, but all three of those, how you can maximize and squeeze the juice without, just wasting a bunch of oranges.
Another question relating to your
Sure.
time when you were working at the Performance Ranch, that's what it was called.
Yeah.
Yeah, you're working with the UFC fighters and specifically relating to John Jones. When you were working with him, was this during his transition period when he was moving from light heavyweight to heavyweight?
No, he was still light heavyweight. Yeah.
Okay, so you were not working with him during the time when he moved up the light heavy to heavyweight.
Yeah, because I had already moved on when that happened. Yeah.
All right, and I'm just curious about the metrics. You said that looking at like his VO2 max and the kind of jump and everything, you said that you were able to rank him in the category of good compared to other MMA fighters. Now, when you said that, was that MMA fighters off? Was that based off MMA fighters that you all have already tested in house, and was that also ranking him amongst those in his weight class. Could you talk a little bit more about that?
Yeah, so luckily the UFC is interesting because they're a contracted they're sports where the athletes are like contracted, right? The negative for that is that like they don't get paid as much, they can choose their own stuff. I don't want to get into all that. The positive is that they are trying to grow their brand. They have always been trying to grow their brand. And so they came out with the UFC Performance Institute, which I think some of your students have like been to. The UFC PI put out this giant book that has all the information you might ever need to like rank how to train, how to nutrition, like anything for UFC. And they did this so that you can elevate the brand and the athletes as a whole, because then the sport gets a lot better. The athletes become more freaky, you get better fights, people want to see that, you get more money. So they released this book. And what I was able to do was use the information that was in that book along with some of our in-house to be like based on these ranges that they had set for light heavyweights at the time, you were in the good. And then compared to some of the guys that we had, I know people that have bigger engines than he does that were in-house, but his thing was his fight IQ and his wrestling. Like no one's gonna beat him at those things, so it doesn't even matter. So that's how we were able to use that information. Now, if you go and work for a team, whether it's MLB, NFL, NBA, you don't get everyone's information, right? Like, why would you? I'm not going to tell you what, my star player is doing until I trade them, and now you have to give them the information. So what you're doing there is you're taking all this historical data and trying to build this information to be like, based on the guys that we've had at his sport or at his position, at his age, he is 90th percentile. He is 60th percentile. So the UFC did it and gave it out. Awesome. If you're a sports scientist with an org, especially one that's starting up, you're the one that's creating those thresholds, those metrics, and ultimately creating the ranges that are like our best athletes were here. We want to try to get everyone here. Our worst athletes are here. This is the floor. So I hope that answers your question, but it's just like how you can do it, whether there's a free resource out there or whether you have to make it your own.
So I guess my question is, from when you were at Mississippi State doing your various positions, what were some of your challenges that you faced as you went from different positions in different sports?
Can you repeat that, Cordero? I just couldn't hear it as much.
While you were at Mississippi State in your various positions, what were some of the challenges that you faced as you progressed in your career and worked in various different sports?
Gotcha. Yeah, the problems are always the expectations, right? So when I was at Mississippi State, the expectation was like, hey, they just have to be for my athletes. They just have to be good enough to compete, and they have to survive every season because they're doing cheer for every sport. You get to the UFC or like elite level, professional level. Now it's like we don't want the good isn't good enough. You need to win, right? Um, and now you need to win with these resources that are not the same as everyone else's. So when we were at the Performance Ranch, again, fighters are contracted, so they get to decide like who they work with, what team they work with. Um, and if you're at the PI, you get everything, right? That's part of your contract, but you have to like be there all the time. At the Performance Ranch, we had a bike, a metabolic cart, we had a jump mat, and we had a push band. And a push band it's they don't make them anymore, but it was a VBT device. And so now I'm trying to win a world championship with devices that you may see in like a high school gym. And now I'm competing against someone who maybe has a $40,000 or $400,000 facility where they have all the bells and whistles. And same thing, we see that in baseball, right? Like you think every team has all the best stuff, but again, pockets are different, expectations are different, and we expect to win a World Series, whether we have no technology or not. And so it's like being able to squeeze out what information we can with the information that we have. So the struggle's always the same thing. Win with what you have. And if you need more, it doesn't matter. You still have to win. Um, and that doesn't change. It just changes in different ways, depending on where you go. It's a good question, though.
Thank you for your time, everybody. Dr. Realzola.
Hey, thanks for the invite.
We are going to stop the recording. I'm going to ask that you stay on a little bit after.
Sure.
So
Cool.